I think that all ends up not in the hands, in some ways, of Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre. I think that's kind of in the hands of Donald Trump.
Are the Liberals intentionally throwing CUSMA under the bus? Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today, we've got Jivani giving his insights of what he learned from America, and it seems that Mexico is ahead of Canada in the trade negotiations. We also have a new dirty tactic coming from Bruce Fanjoy, CTV pushing this out. We got a bunch of stuff here. Let's jump into this. Starting this one off, we've got the Japanese Prime Minister here, has called an election and is won an astounding 247 seats, wiping out the left in Japan. Japan wants to deport the newcomers, as Pleb's pointing out here. All the gangsters, goons, and goblins, getting them out of Japan. We need the same thing in Canada. We've got table salt with this one. Breaking: the Canadian government will resume processing temporary foreign worker applications in 7 cities in Canada because the unemployment rate has fallen just below 6%. 95,000 Canadians gave up on looking for work in February of 2026, and the teen unemployment rate is 20%. Thanks, Liberals. Thanks for nothing. Moving ahead, we've got Melissa with this one. People don't realize the magnitude of the U.S. economy compared to Canada. It's about 13 times bigger, and she's posting top 10 on both sides. And what do we have? NVIDIA, 4.5 trillion market cap. Apple, 4 trillion. Google, 3.9 trillion. Microsoft, 2.9 trillion. And you see all the way down, Amazon, Meta, Broadcom, Tesla. And what do we have in Canada? Royal Bank, $239 billion. It's not even close. Our biggest one here is not even closest to the 10th on American list here, Walmart. Toronto Dominion Bank, $162 billion. Shopify, Enbridge, Bank of Montreal, Brookfield, Agnico, Eagle Mines, Scotiabank, Canadian Imperial, Bank of Commerce, and Canadian Natural Resources. And we've also got this one, manufacturing recession in Canada from the National Bank. And what do we see here? After the world event here, and we see America going up and Canada going down. Mark Carney got in right here just before it starts tanking. And we've got manufacturing as share of Canadian GDP, and well, it's absolutely tanking as well. With all these bad numbers, a new narrative has come out. And before I show you that, I just want to show you this. David Cochran hanging up the gloves on X. That's right, he's done. This account will no longer be monitored or active. DMs will no longer be checked. I've tried to deactivate, but X makes it difficult, but I don't want an imposter to steal the username, but I'm abandoning this platform completely. Thank you for the attention on this matter. It's funny that he uses that same line that Donald Trump uses. So David Cochran completely out of X because he didn't like getting called out. He didn't like getting fact checked. And what do we have from the media these days? Another problem. Jivani went down to America and he's telling us that Mexico is way ahead on the negotiations. As Terry Newman here from the National Post points out, there's no excuse for this. The Liberals have some answering to do. So in this article here, he says he met with Trump, Vance, Marco Rubio to discuss Canada-U.S. relationship. Here's a snippet from that article. It says, however, I do want to point out a key observation related to the need for strategic diplomacy. Mexico, the third partner in our trilateral trade agreement with the U.S., is further ahead in its engagement with the U.S. than Canada is. On January 28th, 2026, Mexico and the U.S. announced formal talks on CUSMA reform. A week later, Mexico and the U.S. announced a joint action plan for critical minerals. Neither of these announcements included Canada. Not only that, Anita Anand did not sign up Canada in that big critical minerals pact that had 50 countries involved with America. This was just a couple days ago. Last week, observers of this news would be right to worry that the current Canadian government may be making similar mistakes as were made under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau during the 2017 CUSMA negotiations. And they're doing this for a reason. Mark Carney needs his majority government. He needs big, scary Donald Trump, and he won't be bigger or scarier than CUSMA being ripped up. Be like, oh, this is so dangerous and divided. The world is so unstable. We need more China, and I need a majority government. That's what he's doing here. He does not care about Canadian lives. He only cares about power and money. And with that, what do we see? This new petition that Bruce Fanjoy is putting out that's getting pushed by CTV News. When have you ever heard of CTV News pushing a petition? There's been tons of them with a crap ton of votes, way more than this petition. It says petition calls for federal leaders to get top secret security clearance. Really, this is a real thing. And all the crazy lefties like this coffee guy pushing this out here. So if we look at the petition, of course, this is being started by Bruce Fanjoy. They have 22,700 signatures. There are plenty of petitions that have way more, like triple the amount of signatures that never got a single blip of screen time on CTV.
An electronic petition on the Parliament website is calling on the House of Commons to require all federal party leaders to have top secret security clearance. It says the reason is to ensure leaders are fully informed of threats to Canada's national security so they can act decisively to protect protect Canadians and our democracy. The petition notes Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre refuses to seek top secret security clearance, which it says exposes Canada to avoidable national security risks.
There it is. They're pushing this here now. Where are all the other petitions? They don't care because they're propaganda media. Funny how you fail to mention that the premise of the gag order imposed by NSICOP has been struck down by 2 lower courts and is now before the Supreme Court. Important information to leave out, don't you think? This whole NSICOP security clearance, if you're new here, what this is, Justin Trudeau created this as a way to silence politicians, basically getting them to sign up for security clearance. They can feed them a little bit of security information, nothing all that important, but then makes it in law that they cannot talk about. So if there's a bit of information on a topic they don't want them to talk about, they'll put it in the security clearance. Then Pierre Poilievre, for example, wouldn't be able to talk about foreign interference with China. So that's why Poilievre doesn't sign it, because it gags him. It doesn't allow him to speak up for what's going on in Canada and what's best for Canadians. This is a way to silence politicians. That's what NSICOP is. It's not good for Canada. This is a way to protect Carney from what Pierre will learn from his MP's trip to Washington, so Jivani, to gag him from bringing up what Carney's trying to hide. The petition doesn't mean anything. Even if it gets 1 million signatures, it doesn't do anything. It's just a way to show how many people support something, and it gets put into Parliament, but it doesn't have any legal weight whatsoever. So same thing with Bruce Vanjoy's petition here. It has no weight of anything whatsoever. I mean, Carney can try to push this through, but he'd have to put it through Parliament. He'd have to change things. He doesn't have the votes. So unless the NDP or the Bloc or someone supporting him on this, they don't want to be gagged either. They don't want to be silenced. Of course, some of these leaders did get their security clearance, like Jagmeet Singh, but I mean, he was in bed with Trudeau, so he was propping him up. He didn't care. So let's jump over to CTV now. They're talking about this whole cooperative atmosphere. There was a photo of Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney sitting together, cooperating. They had a meeting. They talked. There's a couple photos going around. This is one here. So Pierre and Carney had a conversation, and now there's this talk of, are they going to work together to get things done? In reality, a few things for groceries and that stuff, but as a whole, no.
Yeah. Not much. I know everybody loves this talk of cooperation and collaboration, and of course, and we did see them working together on the GST rebate. But, you know, the excitement and fanfare that surrounded that meeting, I did not think was matched by the results. And I don't want to be an atheist in church when it comes to this whole brand new era of cooperation and big pivot in Parliament, but I just don't think it's happening. And I don't think it's happening because the readouts from both leaders were about as tepid and mailed in as you could expect. That photo they released of the two of them, they were so far apart. They looked like divorced parents at a wedding. Like, it just, to me, the whole excitement about, well, there's a brand new tone and strategy, I'm not really sure I buy it. They may end up linking up on a couple legislative initiatives, but at the end of the day, Pierre Poilievre wants Mark Carney's job, and Mark Carney wants Pierre Poilievre behind him. So I just don't think we're going to see some reversal of the laws of political gravity.
Well, we know.
So what really happens here is Mark Carney wants to show that he's willing to work with anyone because he hasn't worked with anyone. He's in a minority government and he's supposed to reach out and make concessions, but he refuses to do that because he's an arrogant banker that's just trying to get floor crossers. And now it looks bad on his record. He's trying to cheat to win, and people realize that, and it's starting to put a stain on his record. Now Pierre Poilievre engaging with him in that way shows him in that prime ministerial way, sitting across from the prime minister. Obviously, he's letting a few things go through, like the GST rebate, because Canadians are struggling so badly because of Carney's ridiculous amounts of deficit spending. So they both get a little bit from it, but really not much is going to come from that.
How real do you think it is? And what's the political or strategic incentive for each side to present this to the public?
Well, while both leaders probably were gritting their teeth a little bit, they both know as well that the message that they're sending to Canadians, the non-cynical ones, Scott, but the message they're sending to Canadians is, quite frankly, we're going to work together for you because we know it's important to you. And it is important to Canadians to see their leaders working with one another. And the main reason being is that the threat from the South is real. And it's very concerning. And more we're seeing jobs being lost to the United States, and more closures and more announcements. So there's a lot more anxiety about it. So I think it was smart for them to do it. What will they do going forward? I don't know. But if you look through the annals of history, you'll oftentimes see prime ministers talk about the fact that they did work with their leader of the opposition. It may not have been something that was apparent. Jack Layton, Stephen Harper, Tom Mulcair, Stephen Harper, they did work together. And they did. I mean, Tom still says nice things about Stephen Harper in their moments when they were working together, but he would try to rip our throats out on the floor of the House of Commons at the same time. So what you necessarily see outward may not be exactly what's happening.
It's interesting you raised that example because Tom was actually on our program this week, Kathleen, when we were covering the portrait unveiling, the official portrait unveiling for former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And he actually described like very regular meetings that they would have that the Prime Minister at the time, like Prime Minister Harper took it very seriously to apprise him of like everything that was going on. They had tons of dialogue in that basically they knew they were at each other's throat, and quite effectively, actually, if I remember back to that day, in Parliament, but that it was different behind the scenes. I think during the Poilievre-Trudeau era, it didn't feel like that was going on.
Yeah.
I don't know if it could be characterized the same way. Can things meaningfully change?
I think they can, and I think that Prime Minister Carney, has demonstrated that. He's not just meeting with the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre. He has met with other opposition parties, too, like Don Davies and whatnot. But, I mean, even though we're approaching Valentine's Day, I don't think what we saw this past week is a love-in. I don't think that it's actually, a real sense of cooperation yet. It's more political, statesmancraft. It's more political choreography, frankly, and what they want to put forward to the public, because nobody wants to have an election right now. So they can't be seen as obstructionist. And Scott's right. There was some genuine movement on the Conservatives to let that GST bill, put that motion forward to expedite it through Parliament. But I think what we really have to watch for is the Budget Implementation Act. Is that where the cooperation is actually going to break down?
I don't think there's going to be much more cooperation. I mean, look what we got coming down the pipe here. We have all sorts of companies leaving Canada. We've got stuff like this. Glencore suspends $300 million investment due to emissions at Quebec smelter. This is bad for Canada. This is tons of ammo for the Conservatives. So a little bit of cooperation, doing what's best for Canadians. The Conservatives do not need to vote for all this draconian eco-nonsense that's running our country into the ground, nor will they. Not to mention other stuff like this. Canada Post getting another $1 billion. At this point, they're just getting unlimited amounts of money as they need it. So they're up to $2 billion now, as this Crown Corporation is just burning money. This has to be redone completely. Canada Post, how it's currently structured, it is not functioning properly.
Because that's a bill that all parties have resisted, have not helped move through. And that's the bill that, frankly, the government needs to see go through. They don't want that parliamentary paralysis. They want things to be moving through. So there's reasons on all sides for there's more cooperation, including, as you mentioned, Stephen Harper. He was in town this past week. Conservatives saw a former prime minister, a former Conservative leader who was more cooperative, who was more conciliatory in tone at times. And I think they saw, Stephen Harper this week, and a lot of Conservatives are urging their leader to be more like the former Conservative leader in Stephen Harper.
I would say only on the...
Stephen Harper, during his speech, told the Liberals, Mark Carney, basically directly that the majority of the problems we're facing now are because of bad Liberal policies and not because of Donald Trump. Sure, you can direct some of those things directly at Donald Trump, the auto industry, those tariffs, but the majority of stuff are just bad Liberal policies, overspending. Inflation is from Justin Trudeau Liberals. And who was Justin Trudeau's advisor for the past 5 years? It was Mark Carney. It's not coincidence that Justin Trudeau brings in the carbon tax, then brings in Mark Carney as his advisor, and then Mark Carney joins Brookfield, and then suddenly all of this stuff gets brought into Canada, all these different eco-green programs, not to mention all these investments in EVs and all this eco-nonsense, which has been a complete failure. And what are we seeing today with Mark Carney's stocks? I've got these stock tickers here with this yellow line right here, which is when Mark Carney got elected, and we can see what has happened to these stocks since then. And Mark Carney holds all of these stocks on here, and you can see most of these are green. The only one that's down is Brookfield Asset Management, because a lot of people dumped this stock. It got pumped, they sold it, made money. But all the rest here, 27% for Brookfield Corporation, 30% Lockheed Martin, Newmont, 113%, GE Vernova. Mark Carney announced this one. He named this one at one of those investments, 110%. That's against the law, as far as I know. Conflict of Interest Act. You can't just outright name a company that you're invested in, but he did it. Same with BWX Technologies, 81%, ConocoPhillips, 15%, ExxonMobil, 37%, Canadian Natural Resources, 32%. Mark Carney's invested in all of these companies. He's making money hand over fist. But for himself and Brookfield to get real rich, he has to double down on all this nonsense, and that's why he brought in his new EV subsidy program, $5,000 to rich Canadians who can afford new electric vehicles, but then starving Canadians get a $1,000 handout for groceries. That's the priorities of Mark Carney.
On the prospect of an election, Scott, when you see what's unfolded over the past few weeks, what is your assessment about the likelihood of one? I think behind the scenes, at least Liberals who were talking more prior to Christmas about there definitely being one sooner rather than later have stopped doing so.
That could mean they're planning one. No, what I really think is, notwithstanding the polls, which we'll see exactly where they settled out, but there appears to be a little bit of a bounce for Mr. Carney and the Liberals coming out of January. I don't think the Liberals are stampeding toward a spring election. I still think they need, given the gravity of the issues that confront us as a country, given the threats of Trump and the economic anxiety that the people feel, I think they would need an explicit trigger. They would need a very firm, clear justification. And I think that all ends up not in the hands, in some ways, of Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre. I think that's kind of in the hands of Donald Trump. If he were to abrogate the USMCA and say, look, I'm going to start these negotiations by serving 6 months' notice, then I think you might see the prime minister justifiably say, you know what, I need to go to the people and get a mandate. I think failing some sort of eruption like that, some sort of enormous move on the part of the Conservatives to block Parliament, which I don't think they're going to be foolish enough to do, I'm not certain there's going to be grounds in the broader political context for an early election call. I still believe there will be an election in 2026, but I don't think one's imminent just because we've seen favorable polls.
Yeah.
So I agree with Scott Reed here completely. If Donald Trump rips up USMCA, then Carney's going to go to an election immediately to get that majority, because he's going to just stir up the fear of Donald Trump. The scary Donald Trump is now destroying our country by ripping up CUSMA, and we need to build Canada strong, and he's caused a rupture, blah, blah, blah. He'll just be more of that nonsense storytelling rhetoric. And if Donald Trump rips up CUSMA completely and doesn't even really negotiate, then I'm going to be thinking that Donald Trump is working with Mark Carney to tank Canada. If he doesn't tank CUSMA, he wants to just renegotiate it a bit, get a better deal for America and sign some sort of deal, then I don't think they're working together. Because really, Donald Trump knows that if they rip up CUSMA, that will be bad for America as well. I mean, this works both ways. It's good for all three countries. And really, what we have here today with Jamil Jivani, this is really the Trump card, if you want to call it that, because this exposes that the Liberals are not doing their job negotiating. They're not doing what's best for Canada. That's what this opens up. It makes them look bad. I don't think it's any surprise we're seeing this nonsense petition from Bruce Fanjoy trying to take away from this. They're trying to diminish this because they know this looks bad, because they're not doing their job. And he's calling them out and saying Mexico's way far ahead. Now, he has other things he wants to report, but out of respect, he's going to talk to Carney first and Dominic LeBlanc before he releases it to the media. So we don't know what that is yet. As Scott Reed said, this is all coming down to Trump, unfortunately.
This week, it's interesting also, the Liberals announced 2 candidates for by-elections whenever those are called, which also kind of lends itself to the one from the Ontario NDP, for example, and the other one kind of a well-known family physician, Daniel Martin, both of them more on the progressive side of things, Lisa, which kind of lends itself to the idea that if they're planning for by-elections, maybe they're not planning for an imminent election. What do you think?
Yeah, so the by-elections are basically a way to test the waters and see how people are voting. It really just comes down to Donald Trump and whether he rips up CUSMA, because if that's the case, then Carney will probably call an election pretty quick.
Possibility of one is.
I'm surprised Scott said yes to 2026, but not imminent. I think that what it comes down to is in that Budget Implementation Act, if the government takes a very entrenched position and refuses to change anything in there at the call of either the opposition Conservative or the NDP or the Bloc, then we may very well see the House fall. It is in the hands of the Liberals at the end of the day if they would like to take any advice from the opposition parties in terms of that Budget Implementation Act, because that is a confidence motion. So we'll end up seeing how they're going to approach it. I think it's dangerous for the Prime Minister to call an election, but I think it's not as dangerous for the House to fall on a confidence motion, because you need a mandate to do certain things in the country.
It feels like no opposition party, though, will imminently force that to be the case. Like, it doesn't seem like anyone
literally hiding behind the curtains the last time, and in order so the government wouldn't fall. So I agree. It's more likely that, Scott said, frankly, that Trump will force Carney's hand. That we've heard Lutnick and others say that the negotiations are pushed to the end of summer. If something breaks down then with CUSMA, with the USMCA, does Carney then take that as the reason to go back to the polls in late fall 2026 on the issue of the trade negotiations, on the issue of U.S. versus Canada and what happens there?
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that.
So this once again comes back to Donald Trump. And I think there's going to be more here that's going to further humiliate Mark Carney and his team and put into question what they're really doing in those negotiations, because it doesn't take a full year to negotiate this. Carney's the one who said July 21st he would have a deal, and what that was like 6 months ago. More than 8 months ago. It's very convenient with this petition going around Bruce Fanjoy, and then you'd have, as it says here, Poilievre has refused national top security clearance to avoid being sworn to secrecy that comes with access to top security documents from CSIS. If he were to read NSICOP reports, he would be restricted from performing his constitutional duty as the official opposition. Yeah, he would get, I believe it's 10 years in jail if he spoke about them. And that's what the Liberals want. I mean, the timing of this too, is there something that's going on with the Trump negotiations that they don't want out there, and that's why they want to restrict it? Is it tied that way, or is it just a way to smear Pierre Poilievre and put it on national television, just keep trying to smear him? And is it cutting down this story by putting it out at the same time? Probably. Another dirty tactic by the Liberals being pushed out by mainstream media.